Thanks very much, Chair. Hi, folks. Thanks for coming along. I've got a number of issues that I want to raise. I'd like to start, first of all, with Gladstone Harbour. We've got the right folk here for that. Thanks very much. I saw in the papers on the weekend that the new minister has now ruled out offshore dumping of the dredge spoil for the second shipping channel in Gladstone, which is in some ways a welcome development. However, as I'm sure the department is aware, the last time there was onshore land reclamation of the dumping from the Western Basin project, it leaked and caused further turbidity problems. And there were reports out this morning that it had actually contributed then to an algal bloom, which may well have played into the fish disease in the harbour. My question is, what will the department do to ensure that we don't have a repeat of that situation with the onshore reclamation?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. With respect to the channel duplication project in Gladstone Harbour, the proponent has indeed lodged a referral with the department on that, and they're in the process of developing their environmental impact statement. In that document, in the referral documentation, they refer to taking a look at the impacts associated with a range of different disposal options, including onshore options, etc. So they'll be progressing that, and part of that obviously will be that they'll need to take a look in a comprehensive way at any potential impacts that that dredge disposal could have wherever it's proposed to be disposed, and make sure that it's adequately measured or managed. And obviously trying to deal with issues along the lines of what you've outlined would be part of that assessment.
Okay, so do you envisage that there would be additional conditions, given that you had conditions last time and they still leaked?
Right.
Can we be assured that there'll be particular attention paid to that issue to try and save what's left of Gladstone Harbour?
Senator, I think the issue, as you phrased at the end there, is effectively making sure that whatever is proposed by the proponent and what measures they're thinking of putting in place, combined with any conditions of approval that may be attached to a decision, if that's what's decided, would adequately deal with the issue. But obviously, we always take a look back on past practices and figure if there are areas where we need to change our practices, so be it. But I think my point is the proponent will be taking a look at this issue and may indeed be coming forward with a different approach based on past experience. And so it may not necessitate additional Commonwealth conditions if the proponent is already proposing to deal with such matters.
Okay, thank you. Just make sure the proponent actually complies with the conditions this time would be good, but that's another matter. I want to move to the Western Basin Dredging and Disposal Project. I'm wondering if the department, what checks did the department do to make sure that the EIS that was prepared by Gladstone Ports Corp took into account all known information about the state of the local environment?
Okay. Senator, it would seem that we're going to have to take that one on notice just because it's a bit of a dated project for us, so we're going to have to dig into our files and come back to you on that specific question.
All right, thanks very much. What action did the department take on warnings that I understand were made by Gabrumpa about the need for a strategic assessment to be undertaken in Gladstone Harbour for all of the various LNG plants and the dredging project? What was the reaction? What action did the department take on that advice from Gabrumpa that in fact a strategic assessment was warranted in Gladstone Harbour?
Senator, Carolyn Cameron, the Assistant Secretary for the Great Barrier Reef Task Force. Do you have a date on when Gabrumpa said that about a strategic assessment? I remember something, but it was...
from memory, it was 2011. August 2011. It's been in the public domain in recent media reports. It's perhaps more your purview than mine to be across those dates.
Senator, what I would say is that the department is required to assess any referral which it receives, and so if a proponent decides to proceed with an individual project, then we will assess that project. The second thing that I would say is that obviously both the Great Barrier Marine Park Authority as well as the Government of Queensland have been involved in a pretty extensive exercise of developing comprehensive strategic assessments on both the coastal area as well as the marine area, and those obviously have Gladstone as well as a number of other ports within scope.
Okay, so as you know, anything that's currently on foot, in fact, is not going to be dealt with by that strat assessment, so we'll just park that. My specific question was, what action did the department take when Gabrumpa warned that if there wasn't a strat assessment done for Gladstone, that EPBC processes would in effect be flawed? Was there any action taken or not?
Senator, again, I think back to Ms. Cameron's comment, we'll have to take that on notice.
Okay. And did the department inform the Minister of Gabrumpa's warning in that respect?
Senator, that would be in the same category as the previous question. We'll have to take that on notice.
Okay, thanks for that. I want to move now to the bilateral agreements, both the assessments and the approvals bilats. Firstly, if I could, the renegotiated Queensland assessment bilateral. I confess, and this is my area, I find it very confusing. Could you please explain to me what is the intended effect of the alteration to the scope of the bilat as regards nuclear actions and marine park, Great Barrier Reef waters and Commonwealth waters? What is the effective change? It's on page 7, particularly clause 12.3.
Senator, the Queensland assessment bilateral, the revisions to an existing assessment bilateral with Queensland, there are basically probably two main substantive changes that have occurred with those revisions. The first is to broaden the matters of national environmental significance that can be addressed under the assessment bilateral, and the broadening of those matters is to include matters in relation to the Great Barrier Reef and matters in relation to nuclear matters, as well as Commonwealth Marine. The second substantive change revision to the agreement is to put in place a range of additional administrative streamlining measures. And one example of that is to cooperate around a single set of conditions, for example.
Okay, thank you. I understood the second part. Just a follow-up question on the first part. So am I correct in that the new scope of the assessment bilat, as in now the Queensland will undertake these assessments on behalf of the Commonwealth, will now include all GBR marine park areas, all GBR World Heritage waters, all Commonwealth waters, and also on nukes? Are there some carve-outs? There seems to be I don't quite understand clause 12.4 sub C about nuclear actions. Are you intending to impart all nuclear actions as currently regulated under the EPBC Act, the assessment of that to Queensland, or are you intending to retain some power over the assessment of nuclear actions? So sorry, there's two parts to that question.
Senator, the provision in 12.4C effectively replicates a provision in the Act that prohibits the Commonwealth Minister, in fact, approving those type of actions, and in fact those type of actions being assessed under the Act as well. So it just replicates an existing carve-out
in that
under
it
the
gives it all to
EPBC Act.
Queensland, or that it doesn't give it to Queensland?
It doesn't give it to
assessment.
Queensland, it carves it out of the agreement. It doesn't.
It doesn't?
That's right.
Okay, so you are retaining the assessment of all aspects of nuclear actions that are currently regulated federally?
No, Senator, that provision effectively prohibits those types of actions, talking about a nuclear power plant, an enrichment plant, that type of thing. They cannot be approved under the EPBC Act. There's no role for an assessment or approval of those types of activities.
Well, that's what
under
the Act
EPBC.
says. Why does that need to be reflected in the agreement? Is this seeking to make any change to what the Act says? What are you trying to do with nuclear?
No, not in that respect, Senator. I think for the purpose of clarity, that's there just to make that
Right, okay,
completely
so the
clear.
Commonwealth will still retain its complete role over the assessment and approval of any nuclear actions, be they prohibited or not, by the terms of the Act, and the state cannot have any role in assessing or approving that. Is that correct?
No, Senator, maybe I'm confusing things a little. I apologise. That provision relates to a subset of nuclear actions that cannot be approved under the EPBC Act. Uranium mining and other types of mining that involves radioactive products and decay products of uranium, for example, those things can be assessed and approved under the EPBC
By
Act.
whom?
approved by the Commonwealth Minister and assessed under this agreement by the state.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to get at. So this does give away the assessment of uranium mining to Queensland, where previously
it allows,
sat with the
yes,
feds
it allows
prior
the
to this
state to
amendment.
undertake those assessments
Okay.
subject to the agreement.
Wouldn't you call that a substantive change? When you listed your two substantive matters,
Yes.
the fact that you'd be delegating uranium assessments back to a state government, you didn't list that as a matter that you thought was worth drawing to our attention as substantive.
Senator, when I talked about the major substantive changes, one of them was to broaden the matters of national environmental significance that can be assessed under the Queensland Assessment Bilateral. And when I mentioned nuclear, I had intended to include the nuclear matters that can be assessed by the Commonwealth and under this assessment bilateral, once it is finalised, by the state, which does include uranium mining under the EPBC Act.
Can I just ask one supplementary and then take you back? Is this seen as a model for future relations with other states, including WA, for example, where there are live assessment processes afoot?
Senator, the policy is to broaden, wherever we can, broaden assessment bilateral agreements with states and territories, or if there isn't an existing assessment bilateral agreement, to put one in place. So the example in relation to WA, we'd be looking at options for broadening their current assessment bilateral agreement.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. On that second aspect of the change about the single set of conditions, can I ask if it's known as yet who will be enforcing those conditions? Is it intended that the Commonwealth would be my sense from the agreement is that the intention is that the state will be implementing most of the conditions and the Commonwealth will be only tacking on what can't be done by the state. Who will be responsible for the enforcement of this single set of conditions? Does that mean that there will be no federal conditions and no more enforcement by the feds or by the community to hold the feds to those conditions?
Senator, I think this is a matter that's still to be discussed with the states about exactly the shape of in which that might be embedded between the Commonwealth and the state, but it could either be, and it sort of depends on which jurisdiction is imposing the condition.
Precisely.
If the conditions were imposed by both jurisdictions and consolidated in a single condition document, then the obligation to enforce the condition remains with the jurisdiction that imposes it. If it is wholly a condition that the state imposes or that the Commonwealth imposes, then that jurisdiction would retain responsibility for the enforcement.
Okay, well, we're obviously paying close attention to what conditions the federal government will retain the application of and therefore the enforcement of, so I trust you're advising the Minister appropriately around that. Moving to approvals bilats, I was very interested in the MOU with the Queensland Government and the Commonwealth, that there didn't seem to be a restatement of the Minister's earlier commitment to retain three things: Commonwealth waters, nuclear actions and state-run projects. Has there been a policy change? Why are those, what we thought, carve-outs that would be retained by the Commonwealth, why are they not reflected in the MOU?
Senator, the policy position is to pursue as comprehensive an accreditation arrangement with each state and territory as possible, subject to the requirements and the standards set out in the EPBC Act being met.
So the negotiations will be undertaken on the basis that Commonwealth waters, nukes and state-run projects will not be quarantined by the Commonwealth from an approval bilat, is that correct?
There are particular issues, Senator, around actions in Commonwealth waters or on Commonwealth land or Commonwealth actions. Those matters are within Commonwealth jurisdiction. So we're anticipating the Commonwealth will retain a role in relation to those matters where there's Commonwealth jurisdiction.
Well, there's currently Commonwealth jurisdiction over all matters of national environmental significance, so if that's your logic, you wouldn't hand off any of them. I don't want to verbal you. Am I clear that you will attempt to retain Commonwealth land and water, but will not attempt to retain jurisdiction over state-run projects?
Senator, in relation to other matters, we'll be doing a very detailed analysis of the processes that each state and territory puts forward for accreditation. We're yet to have the detailed discussions with each state and territory about which processes we'll be looking at in relation to the approvals bilateral agreements. So it's probably premature to be able to say precisely which processes will be in scope for those agreements in which state.
Well, has the Minister instructed the department to maintain his earlier public statements about those areas being quarantined from a handoff of approval powers to the states? Or has the Minister not instructed the department to keep those areas?
Senator, I think I've already said that the policy position is to pursue as comprehensive an approach as possible, and we're yet to have the detailed discussions about which particular processes we may be looking at for accreditation.
I'll just follow up on that, Senator. It will also depend on the nature of the assurance that can be provided around those issues. Say on state projects that the transparency and governance arrangements are adequate, and that provides public assurance. So there are a range of questions that will come to in discussion with the states, individual states, around these matters. But the benchmark is high.
Okay.
On those.
Can I move now to the investigations in... Thanks. All right, can I move very quickly to the investigations into Whitehaven Coal and the allegation that they provided false and misleading information in their referral about the availability of offsets? Can I ask where that investigation is at? It's been on foot for about 9 months now. Can we have an update, please?
Shane Gaddis, Assistant Secretary Compliance and Enforcement Branch.
Yes, I know. Thanks. Waka.
That investigation's ongoing. We don't normally provide comment on ongoing active investigations. I would expect to see some progress before the end of the year on that particular matter.
Has it been actively ongoing? I mean, why has it taken 9 months so far?
Investigations can take quite a long period of time depending on how complex the matter is, the number of other investigations that the investigators are investigating at that particular time. It can take time to get information from certain areas.
Okay, I've got so many other questions that I'll unfortunately put on notice.
Over to Senator Seward, please.
Thank you. I want to ask about the NOPSEMA assessment process. Through that, where's that up to?